Mark Azalea is an industry leader in psychotherapy and men's mental health. He's helped countless guys get back on their feet, deepen their relationships, and excel in their lives. Now he's taken all that he has learned and is sharing it with you. In each episode, Mark will interview an expert in the field of masculinity and men's work. We'll cover topics such as emotional intelligence, masculine identity, anger management, financial health, trauma recovery, marriage and divorce, ethics, and spirituality. Tune in and become a better man.
Welcome back to the Men's Therapy Podcast. I'm here with Randall Wilson. He's a good friend of Miguel Lewis, who's been on the show before. And Rand, I'm excited to get to know you. You're a psychologist. You've been traveling the country in RV for a year, which I think is awesome. I want to hear some stories about that. And we were talking before the show about interest in men's work and nature connection, mindfulness and meditation. There's a lot of overlap. So Rand, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah. So let's just start with you, right? Kind of the personal story. What is your story with masculinity? What's your story with being a male therapist and psychologist? There's not that many of us.
Yeah. So, that's kind of interesting to think about, right? When you're going to school to become a therapist, it used to be sort of flipped in the opposite direction. I think it was something like 30-70 female to male, and now it's about 70-30% female, or that was when I was in school at least. So there's out in the field, there's not quite as many of us, of course. But my experience mainly has been working in the VA system. So I'm working mainly with male patients, and it's worked into my practice that way. And so in terms of, how this journey I'm on relates to my own masculinity, I figured I'd, tell you a little bit about how it started, and because masculinity, I think, plays a role in there somewhere. So there's a few different factors, that is involved in me doing this trip. And, one of them was just I have a value of, adventure. I think that's an important value for human beings to have, to be curious, open, and willing to throw yourself out there and have things go wrong, basically. Also, there was a little bit of a burnout piece in there. I've been working for the VA for about 12 years, specializing in PTSD. And so, you're hearing the worst of the worst every day doing that kind of treatment. And then beyond that, the clinical side of things didn't have me too burnt out, but being stuck in an office with no windows, and this is in Florida, by the way, and so going outside is only an option a few months in the colder months of the year. That really had me feeling trapped and confined, and I didn't feel really fulfilled as a man or just as a person. But so there's another piece here is that about a year and a half before we left, my dad passed away. Really extremely rare form of cancer. It's about 1 in a million. And so he was, he sort of instilled this value of adventure into me, among, other things that he taught me about how to be a man. And so this trip was already in the works, but then it became something more like a commitment that I signed up for this thing, and I'm going to follow through with it, and I'm going to do it, in his honor, and also in a way that I think that he would approve of and that he would enjoy if he was doing it himself.
Yeah, that's a great story. I love the value of adventure. Can you say more about that, about why that's so important to you? Like, what do you get out of it?
So I think, a few things, I guess. One is just, I think human beings, this has been said before, human beings are sort of wired for novelty, right? And novelty seeking can turn into a problem sometimes. But I think it's also, it can work to our benefit if we sort of plug ourselves into it in a healthy way. And so adventure for me means just kind of, again, throwing yourself out there, pursuing things that interest you, and then being prepared for things to go wrong, basically, and being open to that. And I think that's a good recipe for growth for anyone, really. And you don't have to buy an RV and travel around the country like we're doing. You can adventure in a million different ways. But I think it's really crucial to growth and moving forward in your life in a healthy way. If there's no sense of adventure or curiosity, that's when someone, I think, is really stuck, and like when bad things start to happen in a person's life.
Yeah, I think that's true, right? I mean, I think there's so many guys that can fall into this routine and complacency, right? And they're not challenged. And they might think that they've attained security and stability and all these things that they were fighting for, but they don't have that spark anymore. And I see a lot of my like Gen X and Boomer clients where like the light has kind of died from their eyes. They have everything they want, but they're not happy.
Yeah. I think in those generations, that stability was the main thing, like in career and in terms of your home and stuff like that. You do the work 25 to 30 years, retire on schedule. And so, and that brings me back to my dad. So that's what he did. And I've learned, a lot of great things from him. I really admire him as a person. But one of the things that I think that he sort of went astray with that I don't want to repeat is he held off too long on going out and seeking his own adventures. We did camping trips and all that growing up. That's kind of what set me up to be interested in doing this. But he held off retirement, was kind of pushing it back year after year. He was a busybody. And so I think it sort of worried him a little bit. What am I going to do when I'm done working? And then when he finally retired, kept himself so busy that he never had time to go out and adventure and do the things that he wanted to do. And then this cancer he had, by the time we knew what was going on, it was 5 months. He was gone after. And so, it went by in a flash, and the opportunity was gone. And he had dreams to go see Yellowstone, to get a camper and travel around like this. So I think, this idea that like we only have one life, and we often like dream about all these things that we want to do. And it's like, oh, maybe in another life, or maybe when I retire. But you only have one life. And so you got to do what matters to you in the present, in this lifetime,
Yeah, it's really beautiful. I like that you're honoring your dad by doing this trip. It sounds like you're really like completing his journey in a way, getting able to experience that. And, I don't know where spirituality is, but I hope on some way, maybe he's experiencing it through you too.
Yeah. So I haven't shared this with too many people outside of family, but his ashes are coming along for the ride and have been dropped off in some of the most beautiful places in the country. I try to, select the right places and make it meaningful. But he's visited the Grand Canyon. He's visited Yosemite. There's about 7-8 other places he's been to and is a part of now, in a very real physical way.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really awesome. I like that idea that like he's being scattered in all these adventurous places. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, you said you've been doing this since January. So you've been on the road for a while. What have you learned about yourself or about the world or what? Like, what lessons are you getting?
Lots. So, so we have a YouTube channel. I'll plug that at the end. But one of the things we were doing in the beginning was this lessons learned segment at the end of our videos. Because every single trip that we took, going back to like adventure means putting yourself out there, not knowing what's going to happen. We were running into trouble constantly, things breaking, getting to a spot and it's a little bit sketchy or not really what you were hoping it was going to be. And then you got to try to find somewhere else to go. So we're constantly learning lessons, at the practical level like that. Fixing the camper, planning things. Also, it was a really interesting experience for myself and my wife when we started off on this trip. We've been dreaming about this and planning it for like 5 years. And so we really took our time, planned it out well. And it was always something that I was looking forward to in my mind and like, oh, this is going to be amazing. I can't wait. I had this image of what it was going to be like. And then it starts. And, just for example, our very first evening of the trip, we arrived and it was full on Florida thunderstorm opening up on top of us in the dark while we're trying to set our camper up. And we're like, okay, this is day one. And so there's that part, like that's been a major lesson for both of us. what you expect and envision the future is going to look like is often, nothing like what it ends up actually being. And some other things, I learned about myself is breaking away from the 9 to 5 schedule was really easy and wonderful at first, like you're going on vacation. And then quickly afterwards, the guilt starts to set in, like, oh, I'm not working enough, or, I need to be doing more. I need to be pumping out, more travel videos or whatever, and not feeling productive enough, just constantly kind of beating myself up about that. So that was a lesson that took probably 3 months to really get to know and then to start to overcome and to start to give myself permission to really enjoy the trip and not have to work constantly,
Figure out what pace is actually your pace, right? Versus like what I'd imagine the VA kind of prescribed as your pace.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So that's going from a 9 to 5 job to not working hardly at all at first on this trip, which was part of the plan. But I mean, I likened it to, this is a little bit of an exaggeration, but it felt like being in prison and then you get out and you're just like, what do I do with my own time? There's no one telling me what to do. I don't have to be up at a certain time. And then there was that guilt component showing up, like, oh, well, everyone else is going to work. You're watching everyone come camp on the weekends, go back to work. And like, why do I deserve to be out here just having fun, not working,
Yeah, that's interesting. There's like a survivor's guilt element almost, right? Of what makes you so special, or
yeah. That's a good way to describe it. It kind of felt like that. You see people and colleagues still working in the same place, and feeling bad that I'm out here enjoying this, and they're sort of stuck in the office and that kind of thing. Not that that's how they're feeling. They might feel great and feel fulfilled with what they're doing, but a little bit of that survivor's guilt was showing up.
Yeah, I'm curious how it sounds like you got the rhythm now. I'm curious how you found the rhythm, right? Because I know a lot of guys, especially, I think retirement or when they lose their job or they quit, they crumble, right? Without that structure, I think there is just to like, I don't know, fall into a depression, right? Or spend all time watching TV and eating junk food and just like having trouble really kickstarting the engine. How'd you turn that around?
So I'd say a couple of things helped out with that. I was part of a group and talking to this group each week and getting feedback from them, and sort of just hearing it from the outside. When you'd say this stuff out loud, you don't know how you sound, but then when someone bounces it back at you, they were telling me like, you've been planning this for years. This is, and it's really difficult, and there's a lot of planning and stress involved. And so you are working. And so that really helped just to kind of get some feedback. So it's not just my own internal voice talking to me. And then I'd say the other thing is like, I had something really wonderful to really engage myself in, which is like exploring in each place that we're at, going out and hiking each day, taking long drives to some really cool spots. And so I was able over time to really start to turn towards and engage with that more, and sort of forgive myself for the not working part, and reminding myself this was all part of the plan. And then, gradually it just started to fade.
Yeah. Start to like, be like, oh yes, this is what I want,
Yeah.
Cause I think, back to masculinity, maybe we can talk about this a little bit in the next segment. It's like, you took what a lot of guys get all their value from, which is professional. And you're like, okay, what if we just shake that up? Right. And the story that I'm making up is this question of like, who are you without that role? Right. Without that status,
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of men, it's really open and empty. So I'm curious, like, what are you without the job? Right. Like, what facets of yourself came alive during this trip?
I think, I keep circling back to my dad. My dad was probably the most handy human being I've ever come across. He could fix anything. That part I kind of discovered in myself getting on this trip, because everything in an RV breaks like constantly. So imagine picking your house up and driving it down the road, and shaking it really hard once a week, and you can imagine everything breaks. So learning how to fix things, and that I was competent and I was able to do that was a big part of it. And I think also just sort of settling into this like adventurer sort of mentality. Like I'm way out here. I'm sometimes in the middle of nowhere, and seeing this really beautiful stuff. And like, this is what this is all about, and feeling good about that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yes, we're going to move to our first commercial break. When we come back, I want to talk about the fatherhood piece too. You mentioned that you have some kids, and I just imagine you and your family going down the road in kind of this pressure cooker, right? Where you spend a lot of time.
We call it the torture capsule.
Yeah, there you go. Right. It's just
when they're being loud inside.
Yeah, a lot of time together and not having childcare or having friends or any of that stuff. So I'm excited to learn what that experience is like. So if you're listening, hang on in there, and we'll see you on the other side of the commercial break.
Enjoying our shows and can't get enough of us? Follow us on Instagram at Voice America Talk Radio and see what we're cooking up for you.
Men's Therapy Online is now accepting new members. Men's Therapy Online offers a solution to the lack of outlets for emotional expression, positive role models, and access to meaningful milestone experiences. In our post-COVID world, loneliness is at an all-time high. Men need consistent community. Our society is rapidly changing. Old models of masculinity are falling at the task of promoting emotional intelligence and meaningful connection. Men's Therapy Online offers tools and experiences designed to help the man who is struggling to balance traditional male roles and emotional fluidity. Whether you need to get back on your feet or take your life to the next level, Men's Therapy Online has your back. We help our members become a true 21st century man. A man who is not burdened by the rapid change of society, but who contributes to it honorably. If you're interested in signing up and finding your band of brothers, go to menstherapy.online to learn more. That's menstherapy.online. Start your journey today.
These days, everyone is looking for information on staying young, healthy, and fit. The Voice America Health and Wellness Network is here to help you on your quest to better health and a better you. We talk about everything from diet, fitness, and aging to substance abuse, personal growth, mental health, and much more. Learn from our experts who cover health and wellness from traditional and holistic perspectives. Tune in to the Voice America Health and Wellness Network. Healthy living starts here.
You are listening to the Men's Therapy Podcast with Mark Azalea. To reach the show today, please call 866-472-5791. That's 866-472-5791. Or send an email to podcast@menstherapy.online or visit www.menstherapypodcast.com. Now, back to the Men's Therapy Podcast.
Welcome back to the Men's Therapy Podcast. I'm here with Rand Wilson talking about adventuring, novelty, and all the lessons learned along the way. You're traveling the country with your family. And I want to talk about that, right? Like, what is that like, being in that pressure cooker, like you said, the torture capsule, right? With no childcare, no relief, nothing. Just really intense family time, I imagine.
Yeah, that's been it's funny because that's been among the top questions I get from family and friends when I get in contact with them. They want to know where we're at, what we're seeing. But then they want to know how we're maintaining our sanity with two young kids inside of an RV. So the first thing about that is our RV is not tiny. As you can see behind me, this is just like the living space. We've got a bedroom up front, so it's a 36-foot fifth wheel. We have our own, wife and I have our own separate bedroom. So at night, kids are asleep, we can hang out, watch some TV, get some alone time. But the other thing is, I've had this theory about kids. Like kids are loud and rambunctious, and people get frustrated with that, including myself. It, puts you on edge. And I've thought about how, maybe the problem is not the kids are too loud and rambunctious, but that we've put them in too small of of a container, even in a conventional house. Like kids are wild and they're running around, they're loud because they're supposed to be outdoors where that stuff doesn't hurt your ears quite as much and where they can do more of that. So our answer to that has been to basically to be outside as much as possible, which is kind of built into why we are doing this whole trip anyway. But if the kids are getting wild and it's very loud inside this small space with two kids, like then it's time to go outside and we'll take them out or we'll give them something interesting to do to go play outside with. That seems to solve that problem sometimes. Other times I just we both had to really work on our patience, which is sort of like been more of a challenge and I think helped us to grow a little bit more in that part of our parenting, the patience side.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you just kind of diffuse it, right? Like nature can hold all the kids' wildness.
Yeah.
So it's good. I'm curious, like, what's your relationship with your wife like? So, a couple of weeks ago, I just spent about 10 days going in the desert in Moab, which is me and my fiance, off-roading through like the backcountry of Canyonlands. And by the end, I felt a lot closer, but also kind of like ran out of stuff to talk about, right? Like I just like I didn't really know how else to connect. I feel like I kind of hit the bottom of a well or something. I'm curious if you experienced that or what that's like to be so close to a person.
Yeah, that might have happened, if we didn't have the kids with us. I think having the kids along for the ride, I was joking around earlier, I believe before the break and saying that's, or before we started the show actually, and saying that if I'm honest, like all of this stuff I talk about in here all takes second place to the parenting part because we're spending all day with them, very close relationship with them, obviously on this trip. So the amount of time that my wife and I actually get alone to speak to each other is not quite enough to run out of. It's on the other end. It's like we get to the end of the day and we're like, all right, now we finally get to talk without a kid talking over us or wanting to play or something like that.
You could have some adult conversation by the end.
Yeah. And that's become, so our time alone has become kind of precious and we have to really be smart about making sure the kids get all their energy out, that they get to socialize a bit so that they're tired and feeling fulfilled at the end of the day and they'll go to sleep, and then we can actually enjoy some time.
For sure. Yeah. How old are your kids? I don't think we mentioned that on the show.
They're 6 and 8.
Okay. So that's my next question is, are you homeschooling or how are you doing education?
Yes. So we had a plan to homeschool on this trip, before it ever happened. And then my daughter was coming of age to start kindergarten right when COVID hit. And so at that point, we sort of, we were going to start her off in traditional school and then do homeschooling on the trip. But we decided let's just start now. It was only about 2 years after that point we were going to leave on the trip. And then, I like to, I'm very science minded. I'm curious. And so we both started buying a bunch of books. We were starting to read up on homeschooling and all that. And I all of a sudden I hadn't put too much thought into homeschooling, but started to fall into it. We both did like, well, wait a minute, this is really cool. And a lot of it makes sense to me as a psychologist about how kids might, this doesn't go for everyone, of course. Like I don't want to bash on traditional schooling or anything, but a lot of kids might learn better in an unstructured environment where they're allowed to, learn things that they're intrinsically interested in, as opposed to being assigned with something, evaluated and tested, that traditional kind of model of learning. So the kids we're really enjoying this kind of approach to education. The kids are learning a ton. My daughter's a voracious reader. She's reading like a book every couple of nights, a chapter book every couple of nights. So they're really doing well with it. I don't think that they're struggling in any way with that part.
That's awesome. Yeah, it sounds like you're moving more with their natural rhythms and flows. And again, it's like that bonding, right? Like you're their dad and you're their teacher and you're the bus driver, right? You're all,
Yeah, that part's challenging. The driving, we talked about being in the camper with two young kids, but towing a 36-foot fifth wheel behind you with two kids in the car is its own thing.
Yeah,
that's a little bit stressful
because you need to have the focus, right? So you don't want them to be like pulling on the steering wheel or.
Yeah, it's I have a completely new respect for truckers and what they do, because it is draining to drive with a large trailer behind you. Everyone's on their cell phones, everyone's cutting you off. You can't stop very quickly, and so anytime something weird looks like it's going to happen, you go into panic mode. So it's a very draining experience driving with this thing. And then the one advantage truckers have is they usually don't have a 6 and an 8-year-old in the back seat having an argument or yelling about their snack that fell on the ground or something like that.
Right. They don't have that the distraction. Yeah. It is tough. We talked before when we were pre-recording of mindfulness and meditation, right? And this present moment thing. I just keep seeing that pop up again and again and again throughout your story. How does that play into your adventure here?
So I got into mindful meditation through learning a type of therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, which I'm sure has been talked about at some point on the podcast. It's a really incredible therapy, and more than that, it's like kind of a way of conceptualizing cases that I think is really powerful. Anyway, it's a mindfulness based type of therapy, and so I got into it through that. And then at my VA, there was only a couple of us there who were practicing mindfulness, using it in treatment with veterans. And so I kind of became the go-to person for mindfulness stuff there, doing presentations to other staff around the hospital and running groups and that kind of thing. And then, in the years when I started planning this trip, I started to really kind of shift my focus towards the nature side of things and using nature for psychological healing. And the two just kind of, paired up perfectly, because it's not just the physically being out in the woods that suddenly makes you heal or causes some kind of improvement, but it's also the fact that nature, it sort of draws you into the present moment in a really powerful way that not a lot of other things can. And so that, the two really went together for me. And then once I started this trip, personally, the mindfulness has played a big role, because we're seeing all kinds of really incredible things, but they can sort of fly right by you with all the stress of traveling and driving. And so if you're not slowing down and getting present, you're looking at something like the Grand Canyon, or you're looking at El Capitan or something like that. You can just kind of look up and be like, oh, that's cool. Wow, it's really high. But like if you're able to pause and really soak up that experience, you are connecting with it in a deeper way. And so the mindfulness, I think, is like amplified the experience of this trip.
Yeah, I noticed that with a lot of nature trips that I do, especially these like big vistas, like you said, the Grand Canyon or El Capitan. It takes a while for my brain to even process what I'm looking at. And if I just move forward, I don't get any feeling, right? I'm just like, oh yeah, mountain, like whatever, right? But if I can sit and say like, oh wow, like the light is different over there, or oh, there's a whole bunch of little trees down there. Oh, that's the house over there, right? Or it's really like trying to take in like 3-dimensional layers of it all. I think the mind, especially, my work is all computer now. Like, I feel like it flattens things, right? Like I'm looking at this thing that is like miles of view distance, and it feels like a postcard. Like it feels like it's a flat thing. And I have to really just like take a moment, breathe, and feel into it.
Yeah, I hear that. You want to hear a funny story? Speaking of education and all that with the kids and with ourselves, we're learning really interesting stuff whenever we go to these national parks and these cool places. So the the Spanish conquistadors who first walked up onto the edge of the Grand Canyon, there's literally a quote, and I don't remember the exact wording, but it was something like, "This is a useless chasm for which I think they had said no white person will ever return to, and there will be no use for it in the future." And so I remember reading that. I was reading a book in preparation as we were getting there, and I was just like, wow, talk about not being mindful, talking about being short-sighted. They were trying to look for the city of gold or something like that, and this was in their way. I couldn't even imagine. That says a lot though about the value of being mindful and open to your experience. If you're too single-minded and you're trying to get to the city of gold and you come across the Grand Canyon, which now millions of people go to just to look at it because it's so beautiful, and your response is, this is a useless chasm. I think that speaks to how powerful that mindset can be.
Totally. Yeah. Like it's just a hole in the ground. Like, why would anyone want to do this? There's no resources here. There's no reason. And I think it dovetails back into masculinity, because I think a lot of guys struggle, and I did, for a lot of my life, still to some extent, of acknowledging beauty. Like you said, really taking a moment to feel and be touched by the world, that allow themselves to have emotional experiences out there in the world. Do you see that with some of the work that you do or in yourself?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think there's a certain mindset with some men, sort of unhealthy mindset, that a relationship with nature that's about conquering rather than connecting with or being touched by beauty. And that's got a long, interesting history too. With how the U.S. was settled and even things like when Mount Everest was climbed for the first time, the language that's used is about conquering it, right? And and if that's how you feel about the natural world, that's going to play out in your life, and psychologically, you're sort of at war with the world outside of you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just to build on that, I think it brings up a lot of loneliness in guys, right? Because they have that lone soldier mentality or that hyper competitiveness where they feel like it's them versus everything. And just kind of like those conquistadors were saying, right? Like things in their lives is either an obstacle or an asset, right? Either for me or against me. This is very black and white thinking that I think
on like a huge scale for them. They probably were thinking like, oh, how could this have happened to me? Look how big this canyon is.
Right. Like this hole is so big. How are we going to get around? It's going to really delay our timeline here because we can't even see the end of it. Right.
Yeah. Super inconvenient for me.
Right. Yeah. Whereas now with beauty, it's like, whoa, it's so beautiful. You can't even see the end of it. That's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm curious, right? As we move into our break here, what have you felt, and if you've done this work, like what has shifted within you? What do you think you're bringing back into the default world whenever you decide to return?
I think back to what I was talking about earlier, that like forgiveness for not always being ultra productive is something that I'm going to try to hold on to. Just slowing things down in general, because working in a conventional job, everything's so fast paced. You have a weekend off or a vacation, you got to milk every second of it, and it's gone before you know it. And so another thing I've learned on this trip, I'm going to try to hold on to, is just literally slowing down, even with my physical movement. I noticed early in this trip that like when there's nothing for me to be rushing around for, I'm still speed walking around, and I'm like dropping things, and so slowing down, as difficult as it is something that has changed, that this trip changed in me, and like I hope to hold on to.
Yeah, I think that's really wise, right? I'm noticing how rush feels. Like I hate feeling rushed, because that's when the mistakes happen. That's when I go in the wrong direction or make an impulsive decision. So I try to have my life not have a lot of rush in it. And when I do, I don't have a lot of tolerance for that nowadays.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love that idea. Oh, good.
It's interesting how like slowing down ends up meaning less mistakes anyway, right? So like you think you're getting more done by being quicker and faster. You're creating more work by making the wrong decisions, maybe in a hurry. Or messing something up.
Right. Yeah. And it's just scattered. Right. And something I've learned with some of my nature connection stuff is that nature is not rushed, right? Like stuff might feel like it comes out of nowhere, but if you pay attention, it's been happening, right? It's all flows and cycles, right? Even like a weather system. If you pay attention, you can see if it's coming, Yeah.
Yeah. So nature moves at its own pace. That's for sure. Another thing I think that draws that mindful state out of people when they're in nature.
Yeah. Because it's in action, right? Like it's never static. It's always it's moving. So yeah, when we come back, we're going to move to our final commercial break here. When we come back, we'll talk to you, the listeners, about ways that you can slow down, be more mindful, appreciate nature, and some just introspective things to think about as you're considering, changing your lifestyle around. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the other side of the commercial break.
Follow Voice America at facebook.com/Voice America for juicy updates from your favorite radio shows and podcasts.
Men's Therapy Online is now accepting new members. Men's Therapy Online offers a solution to the lack of outlets for emotional expression, positive role models, and access to meaningful milestone experiences. In our post-COVID world, loneliness is at an all-time high. Men need consistent community. Our society is rapidly changing. Old models of masculinity are falling at the task of promoting emotional intelligence and meaningful connection. Men's Therapy Online offers tools and experiences designed to help the man who is struggling to balance traditional male roles and emotional fluidity. Whether you need to get back on your feet or take your life to the next level, Men's Therapy Online has your back. We help our members become a true 21st century man, a man who is not burdened by the rapid change of society, but who contributes to it honorably. If you're interested in signing up and finding your band of brothers, go to menstherapy.online to learn more. That's menstherapy.online. Start your journey today.
These days, everyone is looking for information on staying young, healthy, and fit. The Voice America Health and Wellness Network is here to help you on your quest to better health and a better you. We talk about everything from diet, fitness, and aging to substance abuse, personal growth, mental health, and much more. Learn from our experts who cover health and wellness from traditional and holistic perspectives. Tune in to the Voice America Health and Wellness Network. Healthy living starts here.
You are listening to the Men's Therapy Podcast with Mark Azalea. To reach the show today, please call 866-472-5791. That's 866-472-5791. Or send an email to podcast@menstherapy.online or visit www.menstherapypodcast.com. Now, back to the Men's Therapy Podcast.
Welcome back to the show. I'm sitting here with Randall Wilson, and we're talking about slowing down, being mindful, and being in nature. And Rand, we were chatting a little bit right over this break, and I want to hear some stories that illustrate this stuff, right? Some stories that inspired you to appreciate beauty or snapped you into the present moment, or a moment with your kids that really touched you. What are some of the things that are getting in, you know?
Yeah. So it's difficult to kind of single out places or events on the trip, but I try to make mental notes, because that's one of the biggest, most common questions we get. What's your favorite spots that everybody wants to know? And like, my answer is always like, favorite spot for what purpose, I guess, like most, awe-inspiring and beautiful. That's like Yosemite, Grand Canyon. Those are the ones so far that just were stunning and left us kind of speechless just looking at them. But then like, so what my wife and I both say has been our hands down our favorite spot, though, is the redwood forests, the national and state parks. And there was something, the interesting thing is, you know, it's mainly just forest, like really dense, damp forest. And it has these absolutely enormous, mind-boggling trees in them, obviously, but it's a very like simple recipe in the redwood forest. But for both of us, it was a pretty spiritual experience, I'd say. Like, you're in this forest that's ancient and you know, an old growth forest, and you can just feel that when you're inside of it. And then you're walking amongst these trees that you have to, like, you know, arch your head completely back to even see the top of them. There's something just really special about walking through that old sort of wise type of forest, with the quiet that goes on in that kind of forest, all the life springing up all over the place. It's so much variety. And so I'd say that location overall touched us the most deeply, and it was the one that I think about most often and want to get back to at some point.
Yeah, when I think about I've spent some time in those forests too, and it really has the interconnectedness, right? And for me, the sense of scale that you talked about, and the kind of insignificance of human life, you know, being like, whoa, these things have been here for hundreds of years, and I'm just like this like little ant walking through this forest. surrounded by all this growth and life. And, I've done a lot of nature stuff, and the redwood forest is one of the places that it feels safe, which is wild, right?
Yeah.
Like it feels very homey. It feels very kind of like close. It's very just like kind of like nuzzles you a little bit.
Yeah.
I've been on other, I'm sure you've been to other places that like feel dangerous, right? They feel wild. They feel like, oh my God, I could hurt myself.
No grizzlies in the redwoods, I don't think. So that helps.
Yeah. And it just, everything just feels like soft. Like everything's got moss on it, like there's like always a water feature nearby. Like I've always felt really safe in those types of areas. Versus some of the more hostile environments. Like it doesn't feel hostile at all. It just feels like very welcoming and wise and peaceful.
Yeah. Super peaceful. So and speaking of like all the life there, and we were talking about memorable things on this trip. An interesting thing that's come up from being in all of these really beautiful natural places is like our kids are getting exposed to life and death, basically, like the full process. And that means like lots of questions. They're learning, in the visitor centers and national parks about this process. And so I'm remembering one conversation I was having with my kids about this in the redwood forest. And I don't remember how we got onto the topic, but we were talking about like, one day you guys can come back here and probably see a lot of these same trees, maybe even after mama and papa are gone, basically. Like when you're grown up and you're adults, this is a place you can come back to and you can connect with us in a very real way. Like we were here and we are sort of part of this forest, also in a very real way. And so like, they're 6 and 8. And so I don't know how much of that they're going to hold on to, but I hope that when they grow up that they can come revisit some of these places. And when we're gone, if they're missing us, that they can visit these places and visit us in a way.
Yeah, I think that's lovely. Right. And even just bringing back to the beginning with having your father on the trip in the form of ashes. Right.
Yeah.
I'm having them really connect with that. There is this really beautiful pairing of both grief and celebration. Sounds like that you've been kind of weaving in and out of.
Yeah. And, my dad, we've sort of raised our kids to have a deep appreciation for nature and a connection with nature. And part of how we help them cope with losing my dad is to talk about this topic that like he, not in a woo, sort of like, supernatural way, but in a very real way. He is now a part of all of this and every beautiful vista that you see and in this forest and all of that, like he's sort of become part of that again. And so you can connect with him really anywhere through nature and, sunset or a beautiful forest or a beautiful canyon, river, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And they've gotten a lot out of that, and they'll bring that up sometimes if they see something really beautiful. They'll say, "Oh, that's Pati." So my daughter created a really strange name for my dad. She called him Pati, not to be confused with Potty, but Pati. And it stuck. And so anyway, they say, "Oh, look at this sunset Pati made for us," which is really touching for me. And I think it's really helped them heal after losing him.
That's really cute. That's really cute. That's really sweet. As we move towards the end of the segment here, I'm curious for our listeners, what would you recommend for someone who wants to feel some of these things or wants to tap into some of these things that maybe can't travel, in the same way? Like what are some things that they could do tomorrow to start to feel more mindful and more present?
Yeah. So I'm very conscious of that. I feel like if everyone could, be able to somehow get out and adventure and do this kind of thing, they could get a lot of growth, a lot of healing out of it, but it's just not possible for many people. And I'm very grateful that we're able to do it. And so what I talk with clients about, I do mostly virtual work on the road. And basically like, almost like anything else with setting goals in therapy, if you break it down small enough into small enough pieces, you can still get, the essence of what we're going for here. And so if it's connection with nature and being mindful in nature, it could be as simple as like going out in your backyard, if you have a backyard, or just going out into some green space around you and and sitting and connecting with the things around you in a very basic, mindful way. And so so I do exercises sometimes with clients where it's like before our session, go outside and grab any natural object out of your yard. And it might be a pine cone or a rock or a shell or something like that. In Florida, you find shells in the soil, so that's why that might not make sense. But there's actually shells in people's backyards in Florida. And so anyway, we'll do some mindful meditation where we're literally just holding the object and studying it, very closely and looking at all the intricate details and sort of fostering like an appreciation for that thing. And in the simplest objects, you see all of the beauty and the patterns of nature that are in the big grand objects, like in the national parks and things like that. This is just a smaller version of that,
Yeah, just a microcosm of that, right? Like, looking at a rock, you can see all the different speckles and the textures and all of that right in that rock that you would just kick down the road, right? You wouldn't even notice most of the time.
Yeah. So, and that's you say that's kind of an experience that people end up having towards the end. And they're like, wow, this thing's pretty cool. I didn't think I'd be that interested in it. But anything that nature produces is like that for the most part. It's an infinite amount of variety. It's all interesting. It's all beautiful if you just slow down and really take it in fully and mindfully.
Yeah, it's fractal, right? It's just infinite no matter how deep you go. So I'm curious, Rand, what's the plan for the rest of the trip? Do you have a set end date? Where are you headed next? What are you going to bring back? Like, where's your story go from here?
Yeah. So our YouTube channel is called The Wandering Home, and we've kind of lived up to that name by literally wandering around the country. We've had like a general loop. We did the whole southern border, the whole west, northwest, came back down through Wyoming, Colorado. And now we're up in the Northeast. You can see some leaf colors behind us there, hitting our first real significant cold on the trip. But as far as the end date, we're probably going to do this a bit longer, maybe 6 months. We'll see. And then our goal, so the other reason I came up with that name Wandering Home is because the sort of side goal of this trip is to find where we want to settle. So wandering to our future home, basically. And so I think in about 6 months or so, spring or summer, we're going to start circling around some potential candidates for places, locations that we might want to settle. And at the same time, we're completely open. We might go longer if we seem to be getting more and more comfortable with this lifestyle the longer we do it. So at first we were like, okay, let's just do our year and see everything. And this is a little too stressful. Now we're kind of getting into a groove where we might go a little bit longer. I don't know.
Yeah. Are there any places that you feel like being called to settle? Like anything that called your name?
Well, so this is a touchy, if any of my family listens to this podcast, we've got my wife's side of the family, my side of the family, and both are sort of vying for us to to land near them.
For sure.
We do want to be in the vicinity of family. We don't want to have to travel real far. But a couple of places, I really have always loved anywhere in the Appalachians. And so I grew up camping in the Poconos. When I was in Florida, we would go yearly, get a cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains in Georgia. I feel really at home there. We might not end up being able to do that if we want to be close to family. And so we might also, my wife's family's all in Missouri. We might kind of check out northern Arkansas is sort of a hidden gem in terms of nature and beauty there, and not too overly populated. And I don't think everyone's discovered that yet. And so we're staying wide open with that, and we're going to stay in places a little bit longer to see where we feel like we might find community and what really feels like home.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious, kind of final question here is, have you met any other families that are doing this too? Like, do you meet people on the campsite that are on the same mission? Yeah. I'm
glad you asked that, because that's been one of the surprise, one of the biggest surprises and most rewarding parts of this trip. right off the bat, I think we were 3 weeks into the trip. We met a full-time family, it's called, who was started off in Portland. They'd been doing it for 2.5 years, so they were pros. So we were just learning as much as we can from them. Traveled with them for about a month, and then we met another family in the U.S. from Canada, and the Caseys. I'll ask them to listen to this, because they're going to want to hear about our friendship being talked about on this podcast. We just fell in love with this family. They were like the sweetest people. They started their trip with a 2-month-old baby. So like, I'm complaining about it being loud with 2 kids. They had 3 and one of them's 2 months old. So they were really courageous, I think, to do that. And we traveled with them for about a month also. And we found that like this whole experience gets made even better when you've got someone to travel with like that and share the experiences with, and sit out by the campfire with, make each other, take turns making dinner and stuff like that. That's been really amazing. And like, we're always kind of hoping for when we're going to run into the next family that we link up with.
Yeah, that's awesome. Aren't that metaphor of kind of life being walking each other home, right? Walking next to each other for a while and then splitting off in paths. You really got to experience that, literally, right?
Yeah.
Being aligned with somebody, another family, and then moving.
Yeah, that was a really sad departure, because we were in northern Washington, and they had their time in the U.S. was running out. They had to go back, and they were going to be done with the full-time traveling. So we kind of were grieving with them a little bit. But then, of course, the beauty of technology nowadays is like we're in touch with them all the time. We video chat with them. We're going to meet back up at some point. And the first family is still going. We're definitely going to meet back up with them at some point.
Finally getting try to intercept course. Yeah. So
yeah,
this was great. A lot of moments as I'm reflecting on this episode of like beauty, little touching moments. And I think that's really speaks to how you and your family are doing this intentionally and mindfully, and feeling into some of those deeper undercurrents, right? The emotional thread there.
Yeah.
So yeah, if people want to learn more about you and your family, where can they find you online?
So I kind of separated my psychology, mindfulness stuff from our travel channel on YouTube. We're The Wandering Home, with a "the" in the beginning of it. There's a wandering home. It's not us. And then I'm also on TikTok and YouTube and Instagram, just as Dr. Rand Wilson, and at Trail Therapy on TikTok. And so on there, my main thing is I do these short clips while I'm out hiking, talk about mindfulness, meditation, talk about psychology, related ideas and topics, and usually relating to nature. So that's kind of my my professional side of things. The wandering homes, like our travel and natural beauty side of things.
Awesome. Well, yeah, guys, check it out. And Rand, I'm excited to meet you, and I'm excited to see where your story goes from here. This sounds like this is like an incredible kind of maiden voyage for you and your family. If you're listening, thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week on another episode of the Men's Therapy Podcast.
Thank you for joining your host, Mark Aguilé, on the Men's Therapy Podcast. Be sure to tune in again live next Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time and 11 a.m. Pacific Time on the Voice America Health and Wellness channel and anywhere podcasts are found. To support the show, leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. For more information or to apply to be a guest, visit www.menstherapypodcast.com.